to another dark horse, Gabriel's dark horse. Yes, I refer to myself in third person there. My dark horse for the week 16, when it matters most, it's Mike Evans, wide receiver for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And, you know, you and I had the discussion briefly last week where, look, everyone is playing now. There are no more bye weeks. All these guys are back. So last week I had a really hard time trying to figure out, well, sure, I want people to start Cam Akers, but also everybody might be fully healthy at running back. I get it. Jonathan Taylor, um, David Montgomery and Damian Pierce were kind of guys that we were fumbling around with. Maybe you didn't want to deal with the headaches of the dual backfields. So that was kind of my logic there. This week, Mike Evans has been someone who has been in your lineup early in the season. And as of late, he's probably been out of your lineup, most notably the last 4 or 5 weeks. He's failed to eclipse 60 yards in a game since week 9. But we have to start looking at some of the pros here, kind of build up ourselves going into this week 16. He's seen 9 targets in 3 out of the last 4 games. So the target share is there. They just haven't been good targets from a guy like Tom Brady. Also, we failed to acknowledge that if you can get points for pass interference penalties, then Mike Evans is king because he's clearly been getting action. It just hasn't replicated into fantasy. Last week, that all changed when they went up against Cincinnati. He finally, yards per target was up past 9.5 yards. That's the second highest it's been in the last 7 weeks. And most notably, that's how we've seen Mike Evans find success lately in his career. He gets the long ball. He gets the touchdowns. He's only got 3 touchdowns on the year. He hasn't scored a touchdown since week 4. He hasn't got any big long targets in the last, 7 or 8 weeks. So it was nice to see that his yards per target went up last week. He eclipsed 60 yards. He finished with 83 yards. So that was good to find out. And I just kind of like the matchup this week. Look, the Cardinals, I remember specifically having this conversation week 7, week 6, maybe week 8 even, when we had more of a sample size about how the Arizona Cardinals typically shut down the wide receiver 1 of a given fantasy team. And back then, the argument was good. But that week, my dark horse was Chris Olave. And, of course, it was the rookie who had to crack the code and go off for a great fantasy day against the Arizona Cardinals. Up until that point, they had stopped guys like Cooper Kupp, DK Metcalf, A.J. Brown. It was good. And, I'm not living in the past, but I kind of am. I'm very salty. The Cardinals have given up 30 touchdowns this year through the air. That is tied for 6th in the NFL, so bottom half. And yes, despite Chris Olave's success, since then they have fared well against wide receiver 1s of the opposing team. Who's the wide receiver 1 in Tampa Bay? Lately, it's been Chris Godwin. He's had success. He's been great. He's been catching touchdowns the last few weeks, which has been really good for his fantasy value. But how does that translate into week 16? I think he sees that focus on the defensive side of the football, which leaves room for a guy like Mike Evans to find success and hopefully find the end zone this week. Like I said earlier, he hasn't found the end zone since week 4. And I just think the stars are aligning for a guy like Mike Evans. I think he blows up this week. They made it they made it a real focus since that San Francisco 49ers game to get him involved, to make sure he's seeing those targets. And yes, he saw them before, but let's be honest, San Francisco was the low point. I have him ranked as my wide receiver 15 this week, which is by far his highest ranking for me in the last 5 or 6 weeks total. I like what's going on. I think there's a good narrative to be set here. I think there's good opportunity for him. The targets have been there all along. Now I think we see those bombs. Now I think we see those touchdowns. It's time to put Mike Evans in with confidence. He is a wide receiver 2 this week in your fantasy lineups. Jacob, thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting that you choose Mike Evans because, in most years, he's a set it and forget it. You don't even think about benching him at all. But I do think people are going to be thinking about benching him this week. Look, he had a good game last week, actually. With
83 yards, 4 targets.
That's a really good game, actually, against a tough Cincinnati secondary. So, look, he has better matchups this week and next week. So, yeah, I think, normally it'd be like, why are you even bothering with Mike Evans? Because, of course, everyone's starting him. But I don't think that's the case lately. I think he's been on some people's benches. And It's not an easy decision, especially, you never know what somebody's roster is. Like, people draft at the beginning of the year and everything changes, and people could be sitting there with like 4 solid wide receiver options, and they're maybe deciding between Mike Evans and somebody else. So I think it's a good call. I think he's going to have a strong finish in these last 2 games for the fantasy season.